Morning. Oh, front row, Mark Brand. It's looking good already. Let's get ourselves, we've got too many things to carry. Let's bring on our panel. We've got, you're in for a real treat today. We've got an amazing group of young panelists. Come on up, guys, don't hide. There we go, here we go. And it's been amazing. Are we on the right clock here, by the way, somebody? We've got 45 minutes, right? I think. We've got amazing, well, it's been an absolute privilege, actually, to start this just by spending some time with these guys, understanding where they're at, understanding what they're up to, the reality check of how passionate they are about what we're doing. And you wake up this morning, first of all, these guys are putting, I think, closing down the bar and starting the day. So that's a pretty good start. Well, at least some of them anyway, those that are old enough. So they closed down the bar last night. They start up the day for us today, and you wake up to stuff like this. And I was going to say in the quality press, but it is USA Today. But, you know, sand, surf, and stew of bacteria. We look at what the New York Times, not the New York Times, but the Wall Street Journal are talking about scientists looking at climate as sea lives washed up on a beach. And here we have a group of young leaders, I think is probably the best way to call them, that are driving so much passion and energy from the forefront. And I think it's a great privilege for us to hear from them to start the day. So we're going to kick off. I'm going to ask you, we're going to start with the youngest first, with Ruby. I'm just going to ask you to tell us who you are, where you're from, what's your jam, what's your passion, what's your focus, and how did you get here? How did you end up with a bunch of old people in Sun Valley? I include myself in that group, by the way. Anyone over 25 is old.
So yeah, I'm 17. I'm going into junior year of high school. I've always been very passionate about climate change, and I recently attended the forum 2 years ago and noticed that I was the only person kind of under 18 there. And I really wanted to create a space for everyone for like the kids to like communicate and like learn more as well, because a big topic there was like preparing for the next generation.
Yep.
And so I reached out to Amy, and my biggest passion is just getting like the youth involved in climate change.
So is it fair to say that if it wasn't for you, none of this lot would even be here, right?
I don't know. You guys.
So I think that's the first clap of the day. That we've got the daughter of an attendee who's sitting there listening to these amazing conversations last year and walks away and says, we need to form our own forum. So what a great accolade for you. Jamie.
My name is my mic on?
Yep.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Jamie Margolin. I'm 17 years old. I'm a climate justice activist from Seattle, Washington. And I am a founder of 0 Hour, which is an international youth climate action organization. July of 2018, we organized the first official youth climate march on Washington, D.C., and in 25 cities around the world. And then just a few weeks ago, we organized the Youth Climate Summit in Miami, Florida, where we trained about 350 young people to be climate activists in South Florida. And what brought me here is Christy, who is a documentary filmmaker who's making a film about these young people, which you guys will hear about later. She called me up. She said, you have to come to this forum. And I was like, okay. So here I am.
My name is Jonah Gottlieb. I'm going into my senior year of high school. I'm 17 years old, and I'm from Petaluma, California. I was about an hour north of San Francisco. And I'm the executive director of the National Children's Campaign. So we're a nonprofit organization that works to make sure that the 74 million Americans who are too young to vote still have their voices heard in the political discourse and still have politicians pay attention to the issues that matter to us. So we focus on things like gun violence prevention, healthcare, LGBTQ+ rights, economic security, and of course, the climate crisis, because this is really the issue that's going to control the rest of our lives unless we do something about it right now. So I got involved with the Sun Valley Forum We were in DC in March for our Schools for Climate Action Advocacy Summit. Schools for Climate Action is our environmental legislative arm, and we work with ed sector organizations to call on Congress to act. So we were in DC meeting with members of Congress, and one of our awesome teens was helping organize this summit. So she told me about it, and here I am.
Hey y'all, I'm Kelsey Juliana. I'm the only one not with the, yeah, we can hear me, but we're good. I'm from Eugene, Oregon, just across the pond, or not even the line, whatever. Okay, great start. Anyways, and I've been doing climate work since I was in 5th grade, so about 10 years old. And I've been pursuing climate litigation out of my home state of Oregon since I was 14, entering high school. And I'm one of the plaintiffs, one of 21 on a federal climate case against this US government. And we're 21 plaintiffs, and Vic is one of my co-plaintiffs.
Yeah. So I'm Vic Barrett. I am in college right now. I'm going into my junior year of college. Well, would be. I'm taking some time off, relaxing a bit. Not really doing things like this, actually. Yeah, I'm a first-generation Honduran American. I was born and raised in the Hudson Valley in New York, and then went to high school and moved downstate to New York City when I was 13 years old. So when I was 14, I got involved in climate activism in New York City and basically just trying to give voices to young people who couldn't vote but still wanted to make change on climate change in New York, which is really susceptible to sea level rise, and also educating about environmental racism in New York, looking at examples of when Hurricane Sandy hit, and a lot of the frontlines communities were low-income people of color, because that's where they were more likely to be placed. And after doing that work for a while, I was lucky enough to get involved with the Youth VGov lawsuit, the Our Children's Trust lawsuit, and be one of the 21 plaintiffs suing the US federal government for taking direct action to harm young people in their constitutional rights.
So there you go. And we've talked, a couple of you mentioned the word activist, and just give me an idea. Do you consider yourselves, are you youth activists? Are you organizers? And what does that mean to you? What does it mean in your world? Jonah, you go for it.
Sure. So I consider myself both an activist and an organizer. And I think the real difference is that everyone should be an activist in the sense that everyone should be involved in the political systems that shape our lives. And then the difference between that and an organizer is then, for me, that's someone who's actually out there organizing the strikes, organizing the events, meeting with the members of Congress, and really working more deeply. But if you're an activist if you show up to the Women's March. You're an activist if you show up to a 0-hour march. You're an activist if you are involved, and everyone needs to be an activist.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And three of you, well, Kelsey, Vic, and let me get this right, Jamie, you're all plaintiffs in two suits. One's a Washington State, one is a federal suit. How does that, what does that burden feel like, and what does success look like in a federal lawsuit? I don't even know where to start, actually, as a grown adult, how you sue the government, but you guys are already doing it.
Yeah. I mean, they know what's best. I'll let them talk about federal, since they are the ones suing the national state government, the national government of the United States. I'm a part of a lawsuit suing the Washington state government, so it's a bit different. It's a bit, success is a bit different for us since it's not quite in the spotlight as the national lawsuit is very much in the press. The Washington state lawsuit, to give you guys a little hint of what's happening, so long story short, so I don't go into the legal back and forth, a few years ago, young people extended a hand of friendship to the Washington state government saying, hey, we want to work with you to create a better world and stop emissions and stop the climate crisis. And they were like, that's not our job. And then the back and forth later, and now we're suing them. It's a constitutional lawsuit because in the Washington state constitution, there's this thing called the public trust doctrine, which says that all natural resources needed to survive should be protected for posterity, for younger generations, and currently that is not happening. And then also there's the National Constitution and Declaration of Independence, which says we have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which are also being denied by the Washington state government. And right now, like in Washington state, a lot of people are surprised when we say this because that's Governor Inslee, that's a supposedly like green state, but in reality, there's new fossil fuel infrastructure being built in Washington state right now. Especially, there's fossil fuel infrastructure being built on indigenous land against the consent of the Puyallup tribe. So all of these things are happening. So we're suing, and right now, where we're at in the lawsuit is kind of the Washington state is trying to throw it out, and we're like appealing. So it's very similar to your guys' case in the sense that the government is pushing back, except for us, it's not really in the spotlight that much, so it's kind of in the underground.
Okay, and Kelsey, you are the plaintiff, right? You're the lead plaintiff. How did you get that job?
Well, did I apply for it? No, I'm kidding. Well, I sued the state of Oregon, much like Jamie is suing her state. I sued Oregon governor when I was 14. That case is still active. So in 2011, the organization Our Children's Trust, that is helping support young people in this country and actually all over the world in filing these cases against their governments or against oil and gas companies, they helped me along with youth in all 50 states. And the Oregon case is the only active one. We have been playing a game of jurisdiction ping pong, basically, for the past 8 years, and a matter of exactly like wanting to not claim responsibility and accountability of holding, a state, a government, a city accountable for taking climate change seriously and for reducing emissions and doing all whatever's necessary to get down to a climate, remedy. And so the Oregon case is still active, and we're going to the Supreme Court of Oregon in November, and it's going to be held at a high school. So to me, that's what success looks like. It looks like that this case, whether it be the state case that I'm on or this federal case, that in just 4 years, people say, oh my gosh, it's taken 4 years. Oh my gosh, aren't you exhausted? Yeah, it's exhausting, but we have met such adversity in 4 years, and we're still in it, and we have been propelled by the courts throughout that duration. Yeah. We have met so many obstacles from the defendants, the government, our government, to dismiss this case, shut this case down, tell us that we don't have standing, that our rights don't matter, that we're not in fact being affected by climate change when, our co-plaintiffs, our homes are being, they're going underwater. We are starving from lack of food source. We are getting sick from disease and infection and asthma increases. So we are being affected. And you can't shut us down, and the courts understand that. And so the district, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and even the Supreme Court has propelled our case forward. And that's what success looks like, and it looks like that encouragement from the courts of how necessary this case is to hear at trial. And it also looks like the mass actions from organizations, from young people, from people saying, wait a second, we need to show up, we need a voice. Why aren't we included? It looks like that motivation from young people and the organizing that is happening tangentially, as well as these other means of holding these systems of power accountable, claiming your own power while that's happening.
And the little twist in this that we talked about last night is someone's making a documentary about this, right? So, shameless plug for Christy Cooper. Is Christy in the room? There you are, at the back. Yay! So does that add like a little extra layer to it? Who's gonna, in terms of like this is being followed? There's gonna be a documentary about it. It's gonna tell the story of youth versus Gov. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, real quick.
Vic, you go for it. Come on, let's get you going. Oh, sorry, Kelsey, did you want?
All I wanted to say is that the film, we're so privileged to have this film follow this federal case, but it's called Youth v. Gov. It's not called Juliana v. US. It's the movement. And so it highlights, obviously, the legal work that we're doing, the constitutional right to a stable climate system that we're trying to ingrain, but also it's the movement aspect. And that will be in longevity, be able to watch what young people did in 2015 onward. And it's also an incredible way to assess impact and get young people engaged in the meantime. And I'll leave it over to you.
Yeah, it's been really amazing to be followed and know that our story is being told and documented. I think that we saw, even yesterday during the opening, a great example of what storytelling can do. When we were looking at the documentaries that are being produced, I forgot the gentleman's name, but that made The Cove, and was working on all these documentaries and showing just how important it is for stories to be told and for them to be consumed and actually change the minds or lives of people in the room. And I think that our story is really important in the sense of, like what Kelsey was saying, that it's not just about Juliana versus U.S. or these plaintiffs versus the U.S. federal government. We're young people holding our government accountable, and we want to have that energy and have those waves go through other young people. And it's also an example of how the case is successful, basically setting this precedent that young people can take action, young people can hold their governments accountable, no matter what political power we lack.
And the fact that it's even got this far, I think, is incredible. So wherever it goes next is a phenomenal achievement. When's the documentary out? I mean, obviously the case could run forever, but when are you going to actually get? Is there a deadline yet, or is it ongoing? Next summer. There we go. So let's just switch to. I was interested in understanding a bit more about your collective backgrounds. Right, the easy assumption would be that you're a bunch of liberal kids from liberal communities. How varied are you? Do you come from conservative, liberal backgrounds? How mixed are you in your own groups for what you're doing? Who wants to go with that?
Well, for
Jamie.
me, I mean, I live in Seattle, so that says a lot. But I mean, in my background, like I do not come from an activist family. I do not come from like a family where my mom or dad was dragging me to meetings or anything like that. My dad is actually technically employed in the fossil fuel industry. Technically, he works for an airplane company, which is causing a lot of emissions. But he is 100% supportive of what I do, and is kind of he just has to keep food on the table and help me go to college. And so like that's a very real perspective where it's just like I'm very invested in a just transition for people who work in the fossil fuel industry, because I eat and I will be able to go to college and I live a comfortable life because of that industry. So I thank it for what it's done, but it's time to move on. And like that's why a just transition and like really transitioning is really important to me. My dad is very low in the chain of command, obviously. Like he's an engineer, just like designs, like fixes airplane parts, engineering things, mathy stuff.
They're quite important.
Quite important mathy stuff, but he's not like in the decision making of this company. And then on my mom's side, she is an immigrant from Colombia, South America. She comes from a very poor background, and she's come from a lot of adversity. And like my grandma's staying with me at home. I had to this month I had to leave her to come here, which is sad because she just arrived to visit. But she comes from so much adversity, like really, really hard background in Colombia. And so neither of my parents are specifically activists, but they're not like couch liberals either, where it's like just sitting and complaining. Like my mom has actively lived. Sorry, but that's true.
That's what I do.
Like my mom
What's wrong with that?
My mom has actively lived out. My mom has actively lived out a lot of the issues that we're facing with the poverty that she faced in Colombia. So I come from a background of like, my mom reminds me like, Jamie, tú vives como una princesa, you live like a princess, like you're so privileged, and I keep that in mind. And when in my activism, it's more of me dragging them to meetings, and it's like, I kind of I kind of lead where I'm just like, okay, I have to be here, I'm doing this, and they're like, okay. And they let me do it. So they're really supportive in the fact that they don't step on my neck, they don't stop me, they didn't push me into this, they aren't the reason why I'm into this, but they are very supportive, and the reason why I'm able to do this is because they don't hold me back.
Vic, give us your perspective on this.
Yeah, to me, my identity and my held identities are really important to why I do this work. Being queer, being Afro-Latinx, being Afro-Indigenous, being a first-generation American, I've known from day one that I'm vulnerable in a lot of ways and to a lot of systems that don't necessarily agree with my existence in a lot of ways. And so when first learning about climate change and learning about the impacts that it has on people who look like me and who have had that same reality of always needing to be protected and to protect themselves, it just like, it overwhelmed me with this huge amount of empathy for knowing the fact that there's people all over this world that are struggling, even in ways deeper than I have, to really just exist and to be upheld and to be supported by the systems that are supposed to support them instead of shrunken down by them, basically. And being a first, my dad actually is a conservative Republican, and like talked about that all the time when I was younger. I remember like not really knowing why like all his radio stations sounded so angry and like not knowing like it wasn't until I got older and I was like watching the news and I was like, oh, like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity are not good people. And
How old were you at that point? Just
probably like 12 or 13. But I was mostly raised by my mom, who is an immigrant from Honduras. And we're part of the Afro-Indigenous community of the Greene people in Honduras and have always been coastal people and fishermen people. So her existence is totally affected by climate change. Our culture is totally affected by climate change. We're a critically endangered culture according to UNESCO. And so to talk to her about it was really interesting because she didn't have all the resources and knowledge to know like all the intricacies of how climate change was impacting her. And me like having the privilege that she sacrificed for to come to this country and get me the education I did, being able to use that to educate her on how our people are being harmed has been really important for me and really integral to how I've learned how to communicate climate change and climate justice to anybody basically. And all those influences in my life definitely are what kind of got me to this position of wanting to talk about it and articulate it to anybody, because I've had to have so many hard conversations with my dad, who's a really smart guy, but like is just extremely skeptical and has a lot of skewed opinions about climate change, and also have these conversations with my mom, who's being directly impacted, who we're being directly impacted by it, and having to educate her. So it was always this interesting dichotomy that's definitely helped me to get to where I am and being able to speak about the issue and get to where I am by wanting to fight the issue also.
and talking about climate change, we had conversation came up quite a lot yesterday about the IPCC, work that's been done and the decade that they say we have. Anyone that follows Extinction Rebellion and the handbook they released, which is an amazing book, but thoroughly depressing, but amazing, called This Is Not a Drill, would say actually we got even less than that. It's kind of like we are right at that point of no return. How do you, in your own worlds, how do you think about that time frame, and what kind of goals do you set for yourself? Jonah,
Sure.
You going to go on that?
Yeah. So for me, it's not about any sort of time frame, because climate change and the climate crisis and natural disasters affected by the climate crisis have already affected so many people around the world, myself included. So I really got involved with the climate justice movement after the wildfires in October of 2017 in my Northern California community. And so entire communities, in my county were just devastated, and just seeing, all of that and knowing that, in America we have that privilege where we're able to rebuild, relatively easily compared to all of these other people around the world. And then when you think about, I was just talking to someone who was in Malawi and seeing these children who are already starving because the rivers are drying up, so their food sources are being depleted, or people suffering from Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Harvey, all these typhoons and hurricanes around the world. And people are already being impacted by the effects of the climate crisis. So this time frame is just about stopping it before there's a point of no return. It's not about, making sure that this big scary thing doesn't happen in the future, because it's already happening and it's already destroying lives every single day. So we really just need to get out ahead and really stop it before there is no going back.
For me, I usually use this metaphor of like, we in humanity are in this car, and there is an upcoming collision, and we're speeding towards it. If we had slammed the brakes 30 years ago, maybe we wouldn't have crashed. But right now, with the distance we are 100% going to crash. There is no way that we will avoid the collision. The collision is already happening, and it's happening. We have two options. We can step on the gas pedal, we can continue to step on the gas pedal, and crash as hard and painfully and just wreck ourselves as much as possible. Or we can slam the brakes as hard as we can to minimize the collision, try to salvage the damage, and do the best we can with what we have. Right now, the climate movement is trying to step on the brakes because there is no way now that we're avoiding the collision. Maybe if we were a little back further down the road and we slammed the brakes then, maybe. But right now, people are already crashing. So right now, the people who say, oh, we can just, whatever, we'll just go down. There's a lot of privilege in people saying there's no use in even trying to solve the climate crisis, so we might as well step on the gas pedal and go full steam ahead and crash as hard as we can. I say no.
If I could just add one thing, I think both of those are such beautiful points, and we need to, that's exactly how we should be thinking about this. That we're already on a collision, but what are we gonna do in terms of how aggressive are we gonna feel the effects? And is it salvageable? And then also, the future is present. For young people, the future is now. Like the future is every single day. When you've already lived a life, you can think about, 10 years, well, I've already lived 50. So it's 10 years. When I think of 10 years, I think of, gosh, I really hope I'll be able to and will be raising a 2-year-old. When I think of 10 years, I think, okay, 10 years ago is the age of the youngest plaintiff on our case, who's fighting the US federal government. When I think of 10 years ago, I think of when I first got involved in climate change and how far we've had to fight since then, and that the target goal was 6% reductions per year, and now it's doubled that. So that's, when we think of numbers, please think of the lives that people are living actively every single day. Because yes, the future is, we throw out numbers like this is a future goal. What is it gonna look like in 2050 and 2100? But also know that we're feeling these effects every day, and the future for us is every single day.
I would also add that numbers change because how the 12-year report came out a year ago and people are still saying 12 years, that we have 12 years left to solve the climate. It's 11 years now and it's gonna be 10. The numbers change, people keep talking about it like it doesn't change. So years pass, which means we also have to adjust.
I saw a report yesterday that said we had a year and a half. So get cracking, guys.
And it's very, Kelsey, what you said really resonates because there was a conversation that happened overnight with a significant media company that is also very connected to youth, and Extinction Rebellion were looking for support in a way that other media have given it, and the answer that came back, which they sent me, was, love what you guys are doing, it's not quite right for us now. This is a media company that sells themselves on you, right? They sell themselves on you as their audience. So how you relate to it and how the media relate to it still tells us we've got a lot of work to do. Let's go to something a little bit different. Let's go to retail. Let's go to brand. Let's go to business. I'm going to go to you, Ruby, because you're the reason we're all here, right? So, what brands take you seriously? Where do you, when you think about what you buy, the clothing you buy, the food you eat, the cars you might drive, who is connecting with you in a meaningful way?
Right, yeah, I think we were discussing backstage, there aren't quite enough companies that are really listening and want to get involved, especially in clothing and retail. I know Patagonia was definitely one that we were that does help and work really well with climate change and trying to prevent that, but we were discussing how it's very expensive and it's not something that everyone can just go out and buy every single day and get all of their clothes from there. And I think our generation is, thrift shopping is a really big deal right now, and you would go and everybody's getting that's the new trend, and I think that is almost a subtle way that through media and that our generation is trying to conserve our usage of clothing, and how if you're reusing other people's clothes and making them your own, you're using so many less resources, and I think that's definitely a big thing that our generation is really succeeding at.
And I hadn't really quite grasped this, but when I asked this question to you in our sort of pre-brief, how many of you actually thrift shop beyond in actually most of the stuff you do? Vic, Kelsey, Ruby. So I was expecting it to be like kind of, well, Patagonia's great, but it's kind of expensive, and we go to these kind of brands. And I really hadn't kind of anticipated that how big the movement might be for reusing,
Can I add something on
recycling.
that?
Go for it.
So I have a very, when it comes to like, now that we're on the topic of like personal decisions, where do you buy your clothes, where do you do that, what about personal stuff? I have a very strong opinion about the way that the environmental movement has been framed for a while, and it's been framed in a way that the fossil fuel movement actually supports. So let me explain. The don't litter campaigns and the victim blaming campaigns of like, oh, the earth is not dying because these 100 corporations are causing 70% of all emissions. It's because this kid used a straw once. It's because this, it's because you didn't buy clothes the right way. Like that victim, like it's so noble and important that we do personal changes in our lives and we buy from the right companies when we can. But to pin it, the way it's been pinned on all that, like Shell Oil recently released something that's like, yeah, recycle more. Like these companies are like, cool, yes, victim blame. It's kind of like, if you put it with like, it's kind of like a weird offset of like rape culture where it's like, instead of these corporations who are actively like destroying all life on Earth and we're stuck in their system, it's the people who are feeling the effects. And like, I was recently in Miami for the Youth Climate Summit, and there were these people. We went to this local like Haitian mom and pop restaurant, and they used like plastic forks and stuff. And some like I saw some people next to us are like, oh, like these people are the problem. See, they're like, no, small black-owned businesses are not the problem. The problem is these massive corporations, and what we need to do is not get distracted by the victim blaming and like, oh shoot, a plastic straw, I need to be perfect and not commit eco-sins, because your eco-sins are a tiny, tiny fraction of what is actually happening. What we actually need is system change. And so we need to be very careful when talking about where do you buy your clothes and how eco-friendly do you live, because that narrative to an extent can feed into the fossil fuel industry's victim blaming and like, oh, see, it's you didn't recycle, while they burn everything.
Yep. 0.003% of the plastic in the ocean is from straws, and then 46% of the waste in the ocean comes from the fishing industry. Mm-hmm. So we really need this broad systemic change that's not pinning it on, like Jamie said, the individual, because it's not any of our fault that this is happening. It's these big national corporations, it's these big governments that we need to really take this to and make a big, big difference.
And Vic, from a personal perspective, we were talking about environmental racism, and that was something you felt quite passionate about. Will you touch a little on that for us?
Yeah. Learning about environmental racism in the context of climate justice is really what propelled me into the movement, for sure. Me getting into the movement was happening around the same time as Black Lives Matter, and I was really struggling with this idea. I was watching the news, and I was on my Facebook and Twitter and realizing that, Black people were being killed in the streets by people who are supposed to protect them, literally murdered. And I just started thinking about how it's not just these individual cases, it's not just these individual stories. There's so many systems in the world, in our country, that every day oppress Black people, every day are slowly killing Black people, and climate change is one of those things. I realized that, young people in the South Bronx that are having incredible asthma rates and are gonna have a life expectancy that's gonna be extremely low compared to somebody living in the Upper West Side. That's a form of violence against Black people in the same way a police officer shooting one down in the street is. And it made me realize just how these systems not only don't care about protecting us, these systems actively perpetuate things that harm us every day and kill us every day. And it was just something that I couldn't ignore, and especially looking at it, being first-generation American, also just looking at it in this broader context of brown and Black people all over the world, billions of people all over the world are suffering under a weight of systems that are willingly killing them. And it was just something that I couldn't not think about every day. It's something that I can't frame all my work around because it's such a justice issue, it's such a human issue. And this is definitely what propelled me into the work that I do anyway. And I was also looking at the climate movement and realizing that the stories that were reflected in it weren't stories like mine. It was stories of, like the kind of like the question you asked before, of a lot of, liberal educated white kids who wanted to hop into the climate movement and not listen to the people that were on the front lines, people that are on the ground actually being impacted every day, and instead want to try to come in with this savior complex instead of tapping into all the resilience that brown and black people all over the world have had to have for centuries in order to continue to exist. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is a good segue into the personal, like how your own well-being as a community. So you guys carry, for your age, you carry a burden, right? You're suing the government, you're suing states, you are dealing with environmental racism every day. You are dealing with these challenges. And Kelsey, I want to ask you this, because when you and I talked, you talked about the burden of maintaining an emotional and spiritual compass. Like, how do you... When I was your age, I wasn't doing stuff like this, right? I won't say what I was doing, it wouldn't be appropriate, but we weren't doing stuff like this. How do you keep that energy? How do you look after yourselves?
We all have, I'm sure, a lot to say. Looks like you want to say something real quick?
Go for it.
I'd like Ruby to say, actually. Why don't you say something about this? Let's kick off with you.
Yeah, it's definitely a very stressful topic, and it's a burden because of how much it is going to affect our future, and especially I'm only 16, I want to have a family and raise kids, but I don't want them to have to live in a world where they also are so scared of this impending something that's going to be so horrible that's by their time would be inevitable if we don't make a change, and is already. And so I think for me, to recharge, I guess you could say, the most helpful thing is there is a lot of negative media going out, and which is important because that's something that people need to see, but as well as looking at some of the progress that we've made and looking at more of the positive side of things as a way to kind of take a breath and say it's going to be okay, even though this is such an urgent and not okay time.
Yeah. I feel like maybe if we're going around and saying
Go for
things
it.
that we do for
Yeah.
self-care, that would be good. I think for me, what I do is I find little pockets of normalcy. So 99.9% of my life is in front of a computer working or at conferences like these, and it's very draining and very exhausting sometimes, as much as I enjoy being with y'all. Last night I came home to 400 emails that I didn't finish and that are stressing me out right now. So what I do is I find pockets of normalcy. I hang out with my friends. Maybe there's a girl I like that I chase after. You just find little pockets of teenage normalcy, and you have them, so at least you're okay, I didn't sacrifice everything, and you have some memories of that was fun, that was good.
Yeah. So like Jamie was saying, it's really hard to manage the workload sometimes. I mean, especially, a lot of us on the stage are, full-time students. So, it's hard, I just finished my junior year, and then I go home and I study for the SAT, and then once I'm done with that, I'll put 5, 6, 7 hours in answering emails and writing press releases and organizing conferences and stuff like that every single day. So it's really hard to, have that, not work-life balance, but a save the world's life balance. So it's part of it for me is justifying what life do I have to look forward to later if we can't solve this now? But then, like Jamie said, you really need to find the pockets of normalcy. And another thing is just sometimes you get so bogged down you just kind of forget why you're fighting. So for me, I'll go and I'll binge a David Attenborough documentary. I'll go outside and, hang out with my chickens, hang out with animals. And, really just remind myself, I'm doing this, on behalf of people around the world. I'm doing this on behalf of an entire generation and future generations. And, we're doing this to save the planet and to save ourselves.
when Eamon and I talked about this question, it was a little hard because the reality is that I joke I burned out at age 11 because at the time my greatest heroine was actually a peace and justice activist who died on the Gaza Strip defending Palestinian homes at the age of 24. She just
When you were 11?
And her name was Rachel Corrie. There's a play about her called Rachel Corrie. Everyone research her, especially the students. Change the world. Anyways, the point is that I was just really dragged down at a young age of feeling very isolated and feeling like you either joined me or you weren't with me. And that's not sustainable. And so when we talk about sustainability, and we're all here because, in some facet, we're trying to be sustainable. And we need to think about what does that mean? Like if we're looking at sustainable systems, sustainable products, sustainable ideas, are we being sustainable in ourselves? Like in our guts, in our hearts, in our heads, when we look in the mirror, when we look at our loved ones, do we have that relationship with place, with community, and with self that is going to be sustainable to sustain us while we do this challenging work? Because that is something that we need to ensure, first and foremost, if we're going to talk about systemic sustainability and shifting the systemic paradigm. And so that's kind of my belief. And real quick, for the young ones out there, I see you. And I know this is really challenging sometimes. And so for me, music, absolutely. Going to see music with friends or listening by myself and dancing, getting active, and then just spending time with people who will recharge that cup. Because if you do this work, a lot of people are going to drain it. They're gonna look into your cup for hope, for advice. And it's good to give, but it also is good. You can refill that.
It's important
and
to
lean
receive.
on others.
Yeah, Vic, finish us off.
Yeah, I would say that for me, I focus a lot on community care. I think right now it's a big trend conversation topic amongst people our age, self-care. And I think that the concept of self-care a lot of the times can be really isolating and really driven by a super individualist society that we've created at this point, when community care is the way that people have been taking care of each other for centuries before we got here. And I think that me being able to care for my friends, knowing that maybe they could return that support to me, building into that larger sense of having people feel cared for is something that's really important to me, because then, I kind of think that it's very cyclical. That could come back to me in a time that I need it. And it's really hard to just constantly have to depend on yourself, to be taking care of yourself when you're already in this world that's very focused on self, very focused on selfishness. And so I'm really a big proponent of, everyone's been saying, the ways that they practice that in their own ways of, hanging out with friends, kicking it.
Chickens.
Just, yeah.
Maybe we should put the chickens with the wolves from yesterday and see how they get on.
Yeah. Back. And that kind of ties to something that I would add too for any adults in the room who are wondering what they can do to support the youth activist in their life or support youth activists in their community. I think that creating space, not just just saying creating space, I mean literally creating physical spaces where young people can gather and be together and have ideas, and giving them resources to do that is really important. I don't think I would be doing this work if it all started out with me just constantly being on Zoom calls and talking to people that are across the country, or constantly being on Google Hangouts and not having that interpersonal connection.
That's my entire
doing this work is it's being. What made me want to do it is doing it with my friends in a nice room that had beanbag chairs and cool art on the wall and snacks sometimes. That community aspect is what made this all fun and made me enjoy it. And so I always tell adults that are wondering how they can help people in their little community, if you have an extra space, if you have an office or something that young people can just come into and talk together and be activists together and do this isolating work together, that's definitely something that I would suggest.
So WeWork are very passionate about the environment. They'll be a great partner. We were going to try and do some questions, and we were going to do a couple more, but we're out of time. One thing I do want to do very, very quickly, you got the 30-second speech. You had an announcement to make, you guys.
Yeah.
Do you want to this is a first public airing?
Yeah, so just first of all, we just decided to do this yesterday just because we've been so encouraged by all the people we met yesterday, and we're going to continue to meet Some amazing organizations like the DiCaprio Foundation, Blue Future, all sorts of these people who are coming together and fighting for this common goal. So just quickly to plug one of our events, and then we'll make our big announcement. So on September 15th at American University, we're going to be having a presidential forum with a bunch of the candidates, the Youth and Children Presidential Forum by the National Children's Campaign. We're going to be working to make sure that all the presidential candidates are really paying attention to the issues that matter to all of us. And then we have another announcement.
Yes, so everyone, if you guys want to get out your phones and get ready to start Googling, getting involved. So on September 20th, our organizations, the National Children's Campaign and 0 Hour, along with many local DC organizations and organizers, are going to be spearheading the September 20th climate strike, which we are trying to make the biggest youth and actually just biggest climate mobilization in DC yet. So if you guys want to go to thisiszerohour.org or go to @thisiszerohour on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We will be officially releasing this very soon, but we are going to be spearheading that, and it's going to be an amazing mobilization, and we need your support in all of the ways that you can give it because we are completely volunteer run. I'm just going into my senior year of high school, working my butt off with no payment or any give back, so all support from our adult allies is very much needed. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
We have to end now, but I want to end with a quick energizer. So, real quick chant. When I say this is, you say 0 Hour, okay? This is
0 Hour.
That was sad. This is
0 Hour.
This is
0 Hour.
Y'all are.
Okay.
One more time. This is
0 Hour.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. We're running slightly over time. I blame the audience because we started a bit late. Thank you, Amy, for giving me the best badass panel. Thank you, Ruby, because without you, we wouldn't have this group.